My own schooling. I haven't always been a fanatic about changing the world, nor have I always been interested in education. For most of my youth, I was self-centered and focused on advancing myself and my career. It's interesting the way the word career is supposed to mean the work one does professionally as an adult, but it seems to have quietly crept into our childhood. As early as middle school, I remember the idea of doing things because I can put it on a college transcript became pervasive. The whole idea of accumulating accomplishments and credentials in a linear sequence in order to impress the gatekeepers who could permit me to climb the ladder of life into some desirable future happiness, where my identity was based entirely on my job, actually seemed pretty reasonable. After all, it was all the adults in my life telling me that was the way things worked, and who else could I trust for life guidance? The fact that I was very good at climbing this ladder only inflated my ego and made me more invested in the idea that this path of achievement was important, meaningful, and the right way to live. As a high-achieving student, I grew up with many adults feeding me compliments, saying that I was smart, or worse, gifted, and that as long as I continued achieving such high standards, I would get a great job and live a happy adult life. I was never comfortable with the label of gifted, which came with it a feeling of being an other, and no doubt led to an unhealthy blend of superiority and alienation. There's nothing more toxic for an ego than to think, I don't fit in, but it's okay because I'm better than everyone. I will admit, despite the long-term damage this praise did to my mental health, at the time, I relished in the approval from adults that I was doing things right and I would be successful. Looking back, however, I realized most of this encouragement came from adults who had not achieved high academic success themselves. Their advice was well-intentioned, but was based on their uninformed assumptions of what education is all about, and even more so, the idea that my academic success would lead to my happiness. In particular, I recall the constant reinforcement that pursuing science and engineering was superior to any other path one could take. The fact that I was good at math and science only furthered the encouragement from others to pursue this field. That's not to say that I didn't enjoy math and science, but I was regularly pushed in that direction with no consideration being given to any possible interest in other fields. At the time this was all going on, I didn't really question anything around me. The only real complaint I had about school was the authoritarian nature of the system, namely certain principals or teachers. I always felt very uncomfortable and agitated at being told by teachers that what I was doing was inappropriate or unacceptable, especially when I was being publicly shamed or threatened with punishments in front of my peers. It may be that I deserved to be reprimanded. I was talkative, shouted out a lot of things during class, made lots of inappropriate jokes, and didn't like being told what to do. My hijinks were enough that my classmates voted me teacher's nightmare in our school yearbook, which does indicate I had this coming to me. But my memories of this controlling environment go back as early as second grade, when I was far from being a rebellious teen. The teacher read us a boring story about a beaver who built a dam. We were then told to write 5 sentences, each sentence telling something we learned from the book. I took the instructions literally, and I felt paralyzed. I didn't learn anything from the book. I could not complete the assignment. I wasn't wise enough to know that I could have put anything I wanted on the page, and the teacher would have checked it off. I told the teacher I couldn't do the assignment because I didn't learn anything, and she was upset with me. I had to go sit at a table in the class all alone, and she took my assignment and scribbled a note to my parents about how I refused to do the work, sealed it in an envelope, and told me to take it home to my parents. I still remember that feeling of being shamed in front of my peers and separated from them, all for telling the truth. Though rebelling against authority became more enjoyable and prideful when I was a teen, These encounters with authority were overwhelmingly negative, especially given that I had no power in the situation. The fact that my grades were all good was my saving grace every time I would get into trouble with teachers. Though it didn't prevent me from getting grounded regularly by my parents for receiving phone calls home from my teachers complaining about my behavior, it felt like a trump card to be able to point out that none of these punishments from teachers were meaningful or would affect my life because, after all, I was getting a good grade in their class. To be clear, my misbehaving in school was always mischievous, never malicious. For example, I remember losing computer privileges at my high school because I used a so-called inappropriate image for the cover of my poetry portfolio. The cover of the portfolio was supposed to have a photo with a metaphor for your life. Not only was I given detention for using the image, but I was also forced to create a new, acceptable metaphor for my life. While I completely understand that some people could find my work distasteful, it seems outrageous for an adult to be able to dictate to a teenager that the metaphor they've used to describe their life is incorrect or inappropriate. Beyond getting a detention, a new policy was instated saying I couldn't save files on the school computer network, and I had a special floppy disk on the table of the computer lab with my name on it. Though it felt like public shaming, I did my best to embrace the shame and wear it proudly. I remember the computer lab manager telling me in front of the whole class that 90% of the school hated me. Fortunately, I was quick enough to retort that that's okay, because that 10% really loves me. But that remark has always stayed with me, always wondering if she meant teachers or students. One more clarification. While I do support mischief, I don't support malice. If you're being mean to others and think that's cool, it's not. I had experiences in elementary, middle, and high school with textbook cases of bullying that involved physical threats against me, and that really sucked. I also had experience with the more common and subtle form of bullying, which is picking on people. I confess that I was both on the receiving end and the giving side of that. I wasn't super self-aware of it at the time, but be sure to check in with yourself and be self-aware enough to judge whether you are being genuinely playful with your friends when you're jabbing one another, or if you are putting people down. Looking back now, it is surreal remembering that by the midpoint of my sophomore year of high school, I was in all honors classes and getting good grades, but because I was deemed too disruptive, I was no longer allowed to be in study halls or eat in the cafeteria. I was forced to get papers signed off each week by all of my teachers documenting my behavior. At home, I was grounded as a punishment for the trouble I was getting into at school, which only further tightened the reins and added more pressure. I can't even fathom, given how much freedom I have now in life, that I ever survived in such a constrained environment. But sometimes it's hard to realize what you are experiencing when you have nothing to compare it to. I'm reminded of a speech by Laura Delano, who runs the Inner Compass Initiative from the 2018 Alternatives Conference in Washington, D.C., where she shared about her experiences with the mental health system. In particular, there was a powerful moment in her speech where she recalled the moment she realized that she was being heavily controlled by the mental health system. After spending a decade being a compliant participant, doing whatever her doctors told her, having no awareness that she was being controlled at all, she began to say no to things and received a huge amount of pushback from doctors. I may not have the quote perfect because I don't have a recording of her speech, but essentially, she said, "You only realize just how controlled you are when you start saying no to people in power." Reference 3. I was fortunate that around this time I was having the most challenges at school. A math and science magnet school opened up in Hartford, the Greater Hartford Academy of Math and Science, and I was accepted as a part-time afternoon student. This meant that for my junior and senior years of high school, I spent my morning at my regular school taking my English, language, and history classes, Then I'd drive into the city at lunchtime and take my math and science classes in the afternoon. This midday freedom seemed to help me feel more human. The actual approach to learning at the magnet school was much the same as it was at my regular school, but they had fancier labs and equipment. There were still regular classes, grades, homework, quizzes, and tests. One distinct characteristic of the magnet school was that everyone chose to be there instead of their regular school. So it attracted a lot of overachieving people who enjoyed learning, who I enjoyed being around. The downside of this is that bringing the overachievers together created a more anxious environment where people were more stressed out about their grades. Despite all the good grades that inflated my ego, there was clearly something missing in my soul. I remember during my senior year of high school, making what felt like an embarrassing confession to my mother. I don't understand. I've got great grades, I'm one of the captains of the basketball team, I've got friends, I've got a girlfriend, I'm accepted into college, I've got everything any kid could want, but I'm not happy. Despite this realization, it never occurred to me anything was wrong with the school system. I assumed the problem was with me. The only real insight I had about something being wrong with school was noticing the differences in how different students were treated. I remember around high school graduation time that I gained a sense of discomfort in realizing that the students at the very top got a lot of extra attention to help them get into top-tier colleges, and students at the very bottom got extra support to ensure they graduated, while most of the students in the middle seemed to be shuffled through unnoticed. Though I noticed this disparity, I never questioned the actual method of teaching or the school system as a whole. After all, I was being rewarded with praise for my good grades. Why would I question something which was constantly rewarding me? I just assumed that by attending a public school in an upper-middle-class community in the northeastern United States, that I was getting the best education that was available. Even the Academy of Math and Science I attended for my last 2 years of high school was considered a state-of-the-art facility. It seemed inconceivable that I was getting anything less than the best. In fact, I'd even go on a limb and say that as far as schools go, I probably did attend one of the best. Despite my complaints about the school system, most of my teachers were really amazing people. I think it is the fact that I've experienced the best that actually gives more credibility to my criticisms. Most communities that are frustrated with their schools probably look to a school like Wethersfield High School or the Greater Hartford Academy of Math and Science with envy, not realizing that even these environments are plagued with many of the same systemic problems of all schools. After spending my K-12 years attending public schools, I went on to get an engineering degree from a highly rated university, Boston University, where I continued to focus my efforts on myself and my so-called career. In going to university, I left behind my friends, family, and girlfriend to move to a city where I thought I'd get the best education I could. I have a lot of great memories of my time in college, most of which were with my friends. While I had the most fun with them, I also felt like I learned a lot from them. My actual college classes were fairly impersonal, though they were challenging and the subject matter was interesting. College was mostly a process of going to some lectures and doing weekly problem sets with the occasional lab mixed in. While it was definitely more challenging than high school, I don't know if I would say it was any better, despite the high cost. I remember actually retaking calculus in college, which I already took in high school, thinking that it wasn't possible my high school class would be as good as what I could get from a prestigious university, but my college class was actually far worse. The high school version of the class was much more engaging and interesting, though the format was still pretty similar, of having a combination of lectures and weekly problem sets to complete. This isn't to say all my college classes were like this. Just as in high school, on average, I only had one professor I'd call bad each semester. In general, most of my professors were really amazing, brilliant, hardworking, kind people who were very generous with their time. One of their greatest contributions to my personal development, which they don't get any credit for, is the fact that so many of them were biomedical engineering professors without degrees in biomedical engineering. This may sound like a negative, but it's actually an incredible positive for me. You see, most of my professors who were teaching biomedical engineering were people who were trained as electrical engineers or computer engineers or mechanical engineers whose curiosity led them to begin solving biology problems with their engineering skills. These were the pioneers of the field. They created a field which did not previously exist. It was incredibly powerful to have these professors as a model that set a standard of what normal was. It was being intellectually curious and breaking barriers. I also recall the culture I was surrounded by during college was incredibly reinforcing of this idea that scientists and engineers were superior, both for their great contributions to society and their superior intellect. You can imagine the chip on my shoulder from studying biomedical engineering, which was regarded as the most challenging of all the engineering disciplines. While these are all clearly elitist ideas, they reinforced all my decisions and boosted my ego further. This isn't to say that things come easily to me. I worked hard throughout college, took advantage of every opportunity I could to get work experience to build my resume, and graduated magna cum laude. I completed all of the items on the checklist that society provided me for success, and all metrics indicated I absolutely crushed life to this point. The only thing left was to get a well-paying job as a biomedical engineer where I'd use technology to solve the world's problems and begin my happy adult life. But I realized that wasn't what I wanted.